The model millionaire, that's what the video is going to be about. This is the third story in your treasure chest textbook, written by Oscar Wilde. Typically, there is a twist at the end, and it's a very delightful kind of a story. Now, what kind of a story is this? Now, Oscar Wilde was known for his stories which kind of explode human nature. So this is a story about a young man who helps a man who is a beggar, thinking he's a beggar, but it turns out to be one of the wealthiest men in Europe, right? So how that actually changes his life is essentially this particular story. Okay, so what are the theme points which we should discuss, which you should keep in mind before we read the story? One, of course, that appearances can be deceptive. What you see may not really be the truth. So always keep in mind, what you see could be deceptive. आंखें धोखा दे सकती हैं, like you have that Hindi muhavra, right? So always keep your eyes and ears open, but always rely on your senses. Always cross-check facts. Don't just go by everything that glitters is not gold. Okay, so there are enough proverbs which kind of tell you that you should never believe what your naked eye sees, because that could be deceptive, right? The second one is the act of selfless nobility, kindness, empathy, that willingness to help someone even when you do not have much for yourself in your pocket. So that's again something very important. Then the third one is about what is true wealth. I can say I'm very wealthy. Now, does it only mean that I have a lot of money in my bank balance, that I have a huge bank balance? Or is true wealth about what really I am? That whether I am willing to help someone. What's the point of being the richest man in the world if you do not have, if your heart doesn't beat for the people who need some help, right? So if you are the kind of person who is willing to help someone who needs the help, that's what makes you a truly wealthy person. So I would wish that all your children grow up to be wealthy people of that kind. Of course, you should have money, because with money you can help a lot of people, right? But your heart should be in the right place. Your heart should beat for the people who actually need help from you, right? So that's another one. Then financial security is another theme. And of course, the play on words. So let's get started. Unless one is wealthy. The first one is a little bit of a philosophical kind of a paragraph, so which I will need to explain. So the first one, unless one is wealthy, there is no use in being a charming fellow. So what is the author saying? The author is saying that there is really no point in being a very charming looking fellow, right? Unless one is also wealthy. So being wealthy is important. And then he explains why he is saying so. Romance is the privilege of the rich. That, only the rich can afford to romance someone, right? Not the profession of the unemployed. Because if you're unemployed, romance is not a privilege you can have, because of the circumstances that our protagonist finds himself in. Because at the end of the day, you need a job. You cannot be unemployed. You need a job in order to feed yourself, feed your wife, right? Feed your spouse. So you need, and then only love can blossom. Otherwise, you'll always be caught up in day-to-day problems of bread and butter, right? And shelter, right? So you need to ensure that you have a good, well-paying job, right? So only then romance can really follow. You need to be fairly rich for that. The poor should be practical and prosaic, right? So what he is saying, prosaic is lacking in imagination or creativity. Okay, so the poor should not imagine what more than what they can actually afford. So they should not daydream about something which is not achievable. जो हासिल नहीं हो सकता है, उसके बारे में सपने नहीं देखने चाहिए. What is not achievable, they should not be daydreaming about that. So they need to be practical and prosaic. That is, no creativity, no imagination. It is better to have a permanent income than to be fascinating, right? You should have a permanent income than to actually think about, building castles in the air. These are the great truths of modern life, which Hughie Erskine never realized. Okay, so he never kind of realized all this. Now, he's the hero of our story. Poor Hughie. Intellectually, I mean, proper nouns, Hughie is the way this thing, it could be huge, you could kind of this thing, but let me go with this thing because proper nouns, it can vary from place to place. How it will be pronounced in France will be very different from how it will be pronounced in Britain. Now, since this story has been written in English, we will go with how it will be pronounced in Britain. But in France, it would be pronounced very differently. Intellectually, we must admit he was not of much importance. It was not as though, he was kind of an extremely bright kind of a person. He never said a brilliant or even ill-natured thing in his life. So he neither said something which was like, wow, what a thought kind of a thing, but he was also not an ill-natured kind of a person. But then he was wonderfully good looking, but he was an extremely good looking guy. Okay. With his crisp brown hair, this description you should know. Okay. MCQs ke liye specifically, you need to remember this. He had crisp brown hair, his clear-cut profile, that is very chiseled kind of face, and his gray eyes. He was as popular with men as he was with women, and he had every accomplishment except that of making money. Okay, so he was not good at making money. He was not good at making money, but he had every other accomplishment. He was very good looking. He was not brilliant, but he was not ill-mannered either, right? Because that's what they say, that, he had never said a brilliant or even an ill-natured thing in his life, right? So those are his attributes. His father had bequeathed him, that is, when his father died, he had passed on his cavalry sword, okay, and a history of the Peninsular War in 15 volumes. Now, what would you do with that? With a talwar, with a sword, okay, cavalry is something which is used in the battlefield, and this kind of a 15-volume book on history of the Peninsular War. Hughie hung the first over his looking glass, put the second on a shelf between Ruff's Guide and Bailey's magazine, and lived on 200 a year that an old aunt allowed him. So that is all the money he had. 200, I mean, one would assume it could be pounds or it could be any of the local currency, right? That an old aunt allowed him. He had tried everything. He had gone on the stock exchange for 6 months, but what was a butterfly to do among bulls and bears? Because the stock exchange, the term that is used is bulls and bears. Bulls is which do the profit, bears is what drags the stock market down. If any one of you is familiar with this kind of stock market terminology. So what would a butterfly? Why butterfly? Because he was a good looking guy. He was a butterfly. He was a good looking guy. What would a butterfly do among the bulls and bears? So he was what? He was a misfit at the stock exchange. So he worked there for only 6 months. He had been at a tea merchant for a little longer. So he dabbled in the tea business, right? But had soon tired of Picoy and Shoshong, which are, these are, ek minute. I've written it down. It's Chinese smoked tea, whereas Pico is black tea. Okay, cavalry is essentially referring to soldiers who are trained to fight on horseback, okay, which we had referred to. Then he had tried selling dry sherry, which is a form of wine. That did not answer. The sherry was a little too dry. Okay, that was a little too dry. It's a kind of wine which is not very sweet. Ultimately, he became nothing, a delightful, ineffectual young man with a perfect profile and no profession. So all these businesses failed. The 3 businesses that he tried, the stock exchange, trying to sell tea, and then trying to sell dry wine, none of them succeeded. So he became a delightful, good-looking guy, but काम धंधा नहीं है and no money except the 200 that his aunt sent him every year. To make matters worse, he was in love. Why is it making matters worse? Because of what he said in the first paragraph, that if you are looking to romance, it's good to have a good job. You need to be wealthy. Romance is the privilege of the rich, not of the unemployed. The girl he loved was Laura Merton. Okay, was Laura Merton, the daughter of a retired colonel who had lost his temper and his digestion in India and had never found either of them again. So just trying to be funny, right? India maybe the food didn't suit him, so he's lost his digestion and he's lost his temper also, getting angry, right? And so he comes across as someone who is a bit of a Hindi word use karu, khadus, not a very pleasant kind of person. Laura adored him and he was ready to kiss her. Laura adored him and he was ready to kiss her shoestrings, that he was willing to do anything for Laura. He was deeply in love with her. They were the hands-on meat couple in London and had not a penny piece between them. The Colonel, they were the handsomest, they were the most good-looking couple in London. So this story is based in London and had not a penny piece between them. Okay, but they did not have any money between them. The Colonel was very fond of Hughie, but would not hear of any engagement. But शादी करने के लिए तैयार नहीं था. Why? Because he said, come to me, boy, when you have got 10,000 pounds of your own. So you need to have 10,000 pounds of your own, only then I will give my daughter Laura in marriage to you, sir. Okay. And we will see about it. He used to say, and Hughie looked very glum, that is sad, on those days and had to go to Laura for consolation. That is, he had to cry on her shoulder that, look at me, I don't have a job, my businesses have flopped, and your father is not willing to get you married to me. One morning, as he was on his way to Holland Park, where the Mertons lived, where Laura lived, he dropped in to see a great friend of his, Alan Trevor, who is a painter. Trevor was a painter. Indeed, few people escape that nowadays. That is, everyone, try to take to painting. But he was also an artist, and artists are rather rare. So, he's making a distinction between a painter and an artist. A painter is someone who everyone tries to become a painter. But artist needs, more kind of talent. So he's making a distinction that Alan Trevor was an artist. Personally, he was a strange, rough fellow with a freckled face. Freckle means, lot of kind of marks on the face, and a red, ragged beard. Okay, so that's how Alan Trevor looks. So please remember these words, MCQs specifically. However, when he took up the brush, he was a real master. So with the brush, he was absolutely splendid. And his pictures were eagerly sought after. He had sought after means they were a lot in demand. He had been much attracted by Hughie at first. It must be acknowledged, entirely on account of his personal charm. So he had liked Hughie because obviously Hughie was a very well-mannered kind of person, so, and also good looking. So he had been attracted by Hughie. The only people a painter should know, he used to say, are people who are beautiful, people who are an artistic pleasure to look at, and an intellectual repose to talk to. So he says that people who are beautiful and who are kind of intelligent to talk to, they are the people an artist would really be interested in. A painter should know only those people because he can then paint those people, and he or she kind of can give expression to what that person looks like on canvas. Okay. Men who are dandies and women who are darlings rule the world. Dandies is again someone is used in France, which is why I said there is a touch of French out here. Dandy is a person who is very well dressed and very rich and very well dressed and moves around in high society. So such men were known as dandies in those days, right? And women who are darlings rule the world. At least they should do so. However, after he got to know Hughie better, he liked him quite as much for his bright, buoyant spirit. Bright, buoyant, he was a very exuberant and a very friendly kind of a person, very likable kind of person. And his generous, reckless nature, that he was generous even though he did not have much, almost to the point of being reckless. Reckless means almost very careless, and had given him the permanent entry to his studio. So he could enter his studio at any point in time. So he had given him that liberty because he was very fond of Hughie. When Hughie came in, he found Trevor putting the finishing touches to a wonderful life-size picture of a beggar man. Okay, so he was at work. The beggar himself was standing on a raised platform in a corner of the studio. He was a wizened old man. That is, wizened means a lot of marks on his face, etc., with a face like wrinkled parchment. So that's what his face looked like. Parchment, essentially referring to material made from the skin of animals. Okay, that's what is parchment. So you can imagine that there were a lot of kind of creases on his face and a most piteous expression. That is, he looked extremely sad. Piteous means someone on who you can take pity. Over his shoulders was flung a coarse means rough, brown cloak, as in an overcoat kind of a thing, all tears and tatters. That is, in bad condition because he was a beggar. His thick boots were patched, that is, they were kind of stitched together, they were not in good condition, and cobbled. A cobbler had worked on it, and with one hand he leant on the rough stick, while with the other he held out his battered hat for arms. That is, he was holding on with the stick, and with the other one he was kind of putting out his hat for arms. So that was the kind of portrait that Alan Trevor was making. What an amazing model, whispered Hughie as he shook hands with his friend. Okay, so he likes the look, very realistic look of the beggar. An amazing model, shouted Trevor at the top of his voice. Look at the question mark. The question mark should make you suspicious because he says, model? I should think so. Such beggars as are not to be met with every day. A living Velasquez. Now, Velasquez is a reference to Spanish painter Diego Velázquez. Okay, so that's the reference being made. My stars, what an etching Rembrandt would have made of him. Another reference to a famous painter. That is, someone like Rembrandt would have made a fantastic painting of this beggar. Miserable old chap, said Hughie. How miserable he looks. But I suppose to you painters, his face is his fortune. What is he saying? That if you can draw his painting well, his face well, that is what is going to get you money. So his face is his fortune, that with his face he can actually make money. Certainly, replied Trevor. You don't want a beggar to look happy, do you? Okay, so you don't want to this thing because his face is going to make big money, so he should not look happy. How much does a model make for a sitting? Asked Hughie as he found himself a comfortable seat on a divan. A shilling an hour. So he gets only a shilling for standing for an hour. And how much do you get for your picture, Alan? For this, I get 2,000 pounds. Guineas. Painters, poets, and physicians always get guineas. So we are talking about pound. A guinea is a pound and 1 shilling. So he says that's how our what we get is counted in guineas, not in pounds. Well, I think the model should have a percentage. That is the model, that how much you make and how much money you make, the model should actually get a share of it because he's the one whose face you are kind of making a living on. So he says, well, I think the model should get a percentage, cried Hughie, laughing. They work quite as hard as you. He says, Alan Trevor says, nonsense, nonsense. You look at the trouble of laying on the paint alone. That is, he's saying that, while you are drawing, you have to stand like this, crouch, and you have to keep looking and drawing. So all the artistic work is being done by the painter. He's just standing there doing nothing, right? And standing all day long at one's easel. Now, easel is the wooden frame that on which the canvas is put. Okay, people who are into drawing and painting would be aware of that. It's all very well, Hughie, for you to talk, but I assure you that there are moments when art almost attains to the dignity of manual labor. So he says, art is almost like manual labor because you're standing there. So it's physically extremely taxing, whereas painting actually is more than that. It's physically taxing. It's also mentally very taxing. It drains you out, right? So he says, but you must not chatter. I'm very busy. Smoke a cigarette and keep quiet. So he says, don't disturb me. I'm very busy right now. After some time, the servant came in and told Trevor that the frame maker wanted to speak to him, the frame maker for the painting. Don't run away, Hughie, he said. I will be back in a moment. The old beggar man took advantage of Trevor's absence to rest for a moment because obviously he had been posing like that, like, one Amitabh Bachchan pose like that, kind of a thing. So absence to rest for a moment on a wooden bench that was behind him. He looked so forlorn, means so sad and wretched that Hughie could not help pitying him and felt in his pockets to see what money he had. So Hughie is feeling very sad for him, very pity for him. He's feeling pity for him. Oof. All he could find was a sovereign and some coppers. Okay. Poor old fellow, he thought to himself. He wants it more than I do, but it means no hansoms for a fortnight. Now, what is hansoms? Now, hansom is a horse carriage. Okay, let me just tell you something. Some of you have been asking me what workbook to use for treasure chest, sorry. Probably treasure trove ki aadat hai. So, in case if you want to, right, I leave it entirely to you. But if you're looking for a workbook to write your answers and just generally practice, of course, I'll be giving you a whole lot of question and answers. So that will kind of take care of it. You could look at this particular book which is published. See, there are, I mean, I bought different books, but I wasn't very happy with it. This particular book, which is published by Almond Books, is pretty good. It's pretty comprehensive, I would say. Okay, among all the books that I have seen. Otherwise, if you want to rely on my notes and my question and answers, I think that will take care of it pretty well. I can assure you, you don't really need to. But still, if you're looking to do a workbook, okay, you could look at this by Almond Books. It is called Treasure Chest. This is a workbook put out by it. What you can do is to use the Study with Sudhir coupon code. If you use that, you get a 10% discount on the price. You also get free delivery. Okay, so that is something which, this is not a promotional video. Okay, we don't get anything. This is something which they have offered to SWS students, that if SWS students do that, we'll give them free delivery, also a 10% discount. So it's entirely up to you. Suddenly it occurred to me that some of you had asked me. All he could find was a sovereign, which is a currency, and some coppers. Poor old fellow, I thought to himself, he wants it more than I do, but it means no handsome. So if he gives him the money, because we know it for a fact that even Hughie does not have too much of money, right? He's unemployed. But he's so moved by the sight of that beggar that he thinks that he should help him, even though it means that he will have to forego traveling by a horse carriage that is handsome for 15 days. Okay. And he walked across the studio and slipped the sovereign into the beggar's hand. Okay. The old man started, that is, he was kind of taken aback, and we will come to know why. And a faint smile flitted across his withered lips. So he kind of smiled. Thank you, sir, he said, thank you. Then Trevor arrived and Hughie took his leave, blushing a little at what he had done. He spent the day with Laura, got a charming scolding for his extravagance. Laura scolded him, saying that tumhare paas paise nahi hai, you do not have money, and you are giving about money to a beggar on who you took pity, and had to walk home because he could not afford a horse carriage for the next 15 days. That night he strolled into the Palette Club about 11 o'clock and found Trevor sitting by himself in the smoking room drinking Hawk and Seltzer. Okay, he met Trevor again. Well, Alan, how did the picture, did you get the picture finished? All right, as he lit his cigarette. Finished and framed, my boy, answered Trevor. And by the by, you have made a conquest. That is, you have done something very great. You have kind of, made a conquest, is that you have won over something. What? That old model you saw is quite devoted to you. I had to tell him all about you, who you are, where you live, what your income is, what prospects you have. So the old man has inquired, the beggar has inquired about Hughie, and Alan Trevor has revealed everything about him to the beggar. My dear Alan, said Hughie, I shall probably find him waiting for me when I go home. Now that beggar will think that ek bari ek sovereign de diya, ye har bari dega, so he would be waiting for him at home. So he is not very amused by it. But of course, you are only joking, poor old wretch. I wish I could do something. So he says, but I know you are joking. You wouldn't have told him about me. I think it is dreadful that anyone should be so miserable. I have got heaps of old clothes at home. Like a typical person says, mere paas kafi, I've got a lot of old clothes, so I can actually donate it to the old beggar because he really needs some good clothes. They're all tattered. Do you think he would care for any of them? Well, his rags were falling to bits. Okay, that is, his clothes were all tearing apart. But he looks splendid in them, said Trevor. Now he is looking at it from a painter's point of view, from an artist's point of view. I wouldn't paint him in a frock coat for anything. That, I would not make him wear fancy clothes. A beggar has to look like a beggar. What you call rags, I call romance, because that's how the artist looks at it. His romance is the reality, the realism of the painting. What seems poverty to you is picturesqueness to me. That, it may seem poor, but for me, that is the beauty of the painting. Okay, a typical artist kind of answer. However, I will tell him of your offer. Alan said, Hughie, seriously, you painters are a heartless lot. An artist's heart is his head, replied Trevor. And besides, his heart is his head. We think with our heart, with our head also, because for us, what he looks like is extremely important, right? So that's how we look at it. And besides, our business is to realize the world as we see it. The realism is very important. Not to reform it. We are not trying to change the world for the better. And now tell me how Laura is. The old model was quite interested in her. You don't mean to say that you talked to him about her. Certainly I did. He knows all about the relentless colonel, the lovely Laura, and the 10,000 pounds. So he says, I have told him all about you, that you cannot get married till you are having 10,000 pounds in your pocket of your own. You told that old beggar all my private affairs. He's very angry. My dear boy, said Trevor, smiling, that old beggar, as you call him, is one of the richest men in Europe. He could buy all London tomorrow without overdrawing his account. Okay, that is, he does not have to kind of, borrow or anything. He can actually buy all of London. It's just a figurative, it's an exaggeration. Means to say that he's so rich. He's so rich. Okay. He could buy all London tomorrow without overdrawing his account. He has a house in every capital, dines of gold plate, and can prevent Russia going to war when he chooses. So that's the kind of political clout the old man has. What on earth do you mean? What I say, said Trevor. The old man you saw today in the studio was Baron Hausberg. He's a great friend of mine, buys all my pictures and that sort of thing, and gave me a commission a month ago to paint him as a beggar. So his fancy to look, the richest man wanted to look like a beggar. Okay, maybe to feel the poverty, and he made a fantastic model because Hughie genuinely believed that he looked like a beggar, right? And he is someone who likes Alan Trevor's artistry. And I must say, he made a magnificent figure in his rags, or perhaps I should say in my rags. That is, the clothes were given by me. They are an old suit I got in Spain. Baron Hausberg, cried Hughie. Good heavens, I gave him a sovereign, and he sank into an armchair, the picture of dismay. So he is feeling embarrassed that to the richest man in Europe, I actually gave him a sovereign, thinking that he was a beggar. So he's feeling extremely shamefaced and very embarrassed about it. Gave him a sovereign, shouted Trevor, and he burst into a roar of laughter. My dear boy, you will never see it again. Okay, I think you might have told me, Alan. You should have told me, right? He's sulkily, he's feeling a little unhappy about it, and not make, I wouldn't have made such a fool of myself. Well, to begin with, said Hughie, said Trevor, it never entered my mind that you went about distributing arms in that reckless way. I can understand you're kissing a pretty model, but you're giving a sovereign to an ugly one. By Jove, no. Besides, the fact is that I really was not at home today to anyone, and when you came in, I didn't know whether Hausberg would like his name mentioned. He wasn't in full dress, because he was in tatters, he was not well dressed, and much of his skin was showing. So he may not have liked me to introduce him to you, right? So I wasn't, I had not met him, so I didn't expect that, you go around distributing sovereigns to people, especially someone who looks so bad. What a duffer he must think me, that that I'm such an idiot. Not at all. He was in the highest spirits after you left. He kept chuckling to himself and kept rubbing his old wrinkled hands together, right? So he must be feeling the sovereign. I couldn't make out why he was so interested to know all about you, but now I see it. He will invest your sovereign. He will invest it in his business, okay? And he will pay the interest every 6 months and have a capital story to tell after dinner. And he will tell this story to everyone that, this person thought I was a beggar, gave me this, and I invested the money, and he would tell this story to everyone at, this parties and dinners, etc. So he says, don't worry, your sovereign will actually be well invested now. I am an unlucky devil, growled Hughie. The best thing I can do is to go to bed, and my dear Alan, you must not tell anyone. I should not dare show my face in the row. So row could be a reference to two things. One, it could be a reference to Savile Row, Savile. These are two places in London. One is Savile Row, which is in central London. It is known for its tailors. Or it could be a reference to another place in London called Rotten Row. This is a place in Hyde Park, which is in central London. Beautiful park. Where the rich and fashionable people often go. So it could be a reference to either of the two. Nonsense. It reflects the highest credit on your philanthropic spirit. What is philanthropy? Philanthropy is when you give things in charity. Please remember this word, because This can also come in MCQs. Philanthropy, philanthropic spirit means that you give, you are of a charitable kind of nature. You give people alms away. Okay, Hughie, and don't run away. Have another cigarette. You can talk about Laura as much as you like, so don't feel embarrassed. However, Hughie wouldn't stop and walked home feeling very unhappy and leaving Alan Trevor in fits of laughter. So Alan Trevor is very amused by what has happened. The next morning, as he was at breakfast, the servant brought him a card, brought up a card on which it was written Monsieur. Monsieur in French, which is why I said there is a French touch also. Monsieur means Mr. in French. Gustave Nodin, on behalf of Monsieur le Baron Hosberg. Okay, so the person who has come, his name is Gustave Nodin. I suppose he has come for an apology, said Hughie to himself, and he told the servant to show the visitor up. An old gentleman with gold spectacles and grey hair came into the room and said in a slight French accent, have I the honor of addressing Monsieur Erskine? Hughie bowed. I have come from Baron Hosberg, he continued. The Baron, he said, and immediately Hughie said, I beg, sir, that you will offer him my sincerest apologies, stammered Hughie. So, stammered means it conveys embarrassment. You know, he says, please go to him and tell him that I am very sorry about what I had done. The Baron, said the old gentleman with a smile, has commissioned me to bring you this letter, and he extended a sealed envelope. On the outside was written, a wedding present to Hugh Erskine and Laurie Merton from an old beggar, and inside was a check for £10,000 over the amount he wanted, right? So he had given him £10,000. When they were married, so they got married because now the colonel cannot say no. He has £10,000 now. So when they were married, Alan Trevor was the best man. That is, you have the concept in Christianity of a best man at the marriage, generally the best friend of the groom. And the Baron made a speech at the wedding breakfast. So the Baron Hosberg also came. Millionaire models, remarked Alan, are rare enough. But by Jove, model millionaires are rarer still. Now this is the interesting line in the sense that millionaire models, you know, the Baron Hosberg was a millionaire model, right? He was a millionaire and he decided to model for Alan Trevor. They are rare, you know. You wouldn't find a millionaire wanting to look like a beggar and pose like a beggar, right? That is rare. But being a model millionaire, now he's a model millionaire, someone who has a heart of gold, someone gives him a sovereign, he gives £10,000 in return and does him a good turn so that now he can marry his sweetheart, Laura Merton, right? So they are even more rare. So it ends on a very happy kind of a note. I was thinking, you know, is it possible that model millionaire, is he referring only to Baron, or could he also be referring to Hughie? But then Hughie is not a millionaire, right? But he's a very model kind of a person. He's very good looking. He has a heart of gold, right? He's not ill-mannered. So in that sense, yes, his business has flopped. He was not able to make money, but otherwise he's a good guy, right? But he's not a millionaire. So this one is a reference to Baron Hosberg, who is like an comes like an angel in disguise, as far as truly in disguise, right? An angel in disguise for Hughie and Laura, and because of his generosity, Hughie wouldn't have said that, you know, he didn't give, but on his own accord to give him £10,000 and help this young couple is something which was truly remarkable. Okay, I enjoyed doing this story, so I hope you did as well. This is a satire on the values of the upper class. A whole lot of questions I have written. Okay, so please go through that, the significance of the title, which I just now mentioned. So with that, we come to the end of this video. I hope you enjoy. Tata, bye bye. Take good care of yourself.